Hello, brothers and sisters. I'm Pastor Stephen Jurdy at Zion Lutheran Church in Wausau, here to share with you a word at the middle of the week as we continue our series in Portraits of Mercy, examples of Christians from church history who have reflected the mercy of Christ into our world. Today I would like to talk with you about a young woman named Elizabeth of Hungary. Elizabeth was born in 1207 as the daughter of the King of Hungary, Andrew II, and she did not live very long. She only lived 24 years. But in her brief life, she was remembered for showing charity to the people around her and for being very generous with the wealth to which she was born. And because of that generosity and that charity, she gives us an example of mercy today. So who was Elizabeth of Hungary? Well, as the daughter of the King of Hungary, she was someone who was born into a world where the daughters of kings were valuable because of the marriages that they could forge or they could have that would forge alliances for their parents and their countries. And that's in fact what happened to Elizabeth. At the age of 14, she was betrothed to marry a man named Louis. And Louis was the Landgrave of Thuringia, an area in central Germany. And Louis appears to have been a good and kind man like Elizabeth, because when Elizabeth ultimately was married to him, he did not mind that she promptly began giving his money away. I believe she married him when she was 20 years old, so betrothed at the age of 14 and then married at the age of 20. And as the new woman of the house, she began using the wealth of Louis to feed the poor. She used that wealth as alms to give away to people who were hungry or who did not have enough money for their daily requirements. And not only did she give away the money and the wealth of her husband, and again, he let her do that, but she also gave away, apparently, the state robes of Thuringia. That is the special robes that the officials and the royalty of Thuringia would wear for state functions. And of course, those robes are usually quite rich, and she would give those away to feed the poor. And ultimately, what she did is she built a hospital. Just 4 years after her marriage to Louis, Louis died. They had had a few children, but he died quite young. And so he left Elizabeth with those children. And Elizabeth, who had already been influenced by the example of St. Francis of Assisi, dedicated herself to following a life like that of Francis. And so she made other arrangements for her children to be raised and cared for. And then she devoted herself to a life of good works. And one particular good work for which she is remembered is building a hospital with 28 beds near the Wartburg Castle. And that word Wartburg might sound familiar to Lutherans who are watching this video, because there is, of course, Wartburg College in the United States, and we know that also the Wartburg Castle played a role in the life of Martin Luther. In fact, Martin Luther was very fond of Elizabeth of Hungary and numbered her among some of his favorite saints. But she built this castle from the wealth at her disposal. Not this castle, this hospital, from the wealth at her disposal. It had 28 beds. Hospitals weren't large operations at this time. It would have been around 1227 to 1231 AD. And for the 4 remaining years of her life, she went daily to care for the sick who were in that hospital. Now, she also died young. As you know, in the Middle Ages, people didn't always live a very long time. But this example of mercy, of providing a space for the sick to be cared for, is something that has been a steady feature of the Christian life. The early Christians also cared for the sick. And in fact, it was frequently the care of Christians for their loved ones and for each other and for their enemies in the midst of things like plagues and illnesses that would strike people as making the Christians stand out and making the Christians an attractive group to belong to. These Christians took care of each other. They didn't run away when the plague came. They stayed and they cared for people with the plague. That was in the early church, even if it meant their own death. And then this continued throughout the church's history, so that Elizabeth stands in a long tradition of Christians who had found hospitals for the care of those with diseases or those who are dying. Today, I understand more than 25% of the world's hospitals are run by Christians and were started by Christian churches. The Roman Catholic Church, the United Methodist Church, the Lutheran churches, also Seventh-day Adventists. These are all churches, and Presbyterian churches, probably others I don't know about. All of these Christian churches have started hospitals across the world, many of which you probably have been to yourself, or that loved ones you know have probably been to. Why does the church do that? Well, the church does that. Elizabeth did that, because we know that our Lord God himself cares for the sick, and that when Jesus came to this earth, he would cure lepers, and he would cure those with fevers, and he would raise the dead. It is God's will, ultimately, that the whole world be free of illness and disease and know the liberation and the freedom of the children of God. And so that's what Christians do, waiting for that future, waiting for that great salvation, that great liberation, that great healing of creation. We work even now for it in the confidence that our God is pleased to work through us for the care and the good of our fellow creatures. That's our portrait of mercy for this week. The Lord's peace be with you as you seek to show mercy in your life, even as God has shown you his mercy in Jesus Christ. Thanks.